The date is January 3rd, 2026. It is 2:01 in the morning. In a modest residential compound in Caracas, Venezuela's capital, President Nicolas Maduro sleeps beside his wife, Cilia Flores. Neither of them knows that in approximately 3 minutes their lives will change forever. The bedroom is quiet. The guards outside patrol as they do every night. Nothing seems unusual. But thousands of miles away, in a secure room at Mar-a-Lago, Florida, President Donald Trump sits before multiple screens, watching a live feed. What he sees is not a movie, not a simulation, but actual military personnel preparing for one of the most audacious operations in modern history. Just minutes earlier, more than 150 American military aircraft had taken off from 20 different bases. The night sky over the Caribbean filled with the sound of engines as bombers, fighters, intelligence aircraft, and helicopters moved in coordinated formation toward a single destination. The operation had been codenamed Absolute Resolve. For months, intelligence officers had been preparing for this moment. For months, military planners had rehearsed every possible scenario. And now, in the early hours of a January morning, everything was about to unfold in real time. At approximately 1:30 a.m. local time, the first wave of strikes began. American fighter jets and bombers targeted Venezuelan air defense systems around Caracas. Explosions lit up the darkness. Radar installations were destroyed. Anti-aircraft positions went silent. The Venezuelan military, taken completely by surprise, struggled to understand what was happening. At the same time, a cyber operation disabled the electrical grid in key sections of the capital. Neighborhoods plunged into darkness. People woke to the sound of explosions, confused and frightened, unable to see what was unfolding outside their windows. The helicopters came in low, flying barely 100 feet above the ocean surface to avoid radar detection. These were no ordinary helicopters. They carried members of Delta Force, the United States Army's most elite special operations unit. These soldiers trained for years to execute missions that seemed impossible. Tonight, their target was not a weapons cache, not a terrorist hideout, but the sitting president of a sovereign nation. The helicopters reached Venezuelan airspace undetected. The suppression of air defenses had worked. As they approached Caracas, the pilots could see fires burning where the strikes had hit. They continued toward Fort Tuna, Venezuela's largest military complex, where intelligence had indicated Maduro was sleeping. Inside the room at Mar-a-Lago, Trump watched the feed intently. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stood nearby, along with other senior officials. They could see the helicopters approaching the target. They could see the Delta Force operators preparing to fast rope down to the roof. According to later reports, Trump would describe this experience as watching a television show, but the stakes were incomparably higher. Real lives hung in the balance. An entire country's future was about to be decided in the next few minutes. At 2:01 a.m., the helicopters reached Maduro's compound. Guards on the ground opened fire. Tracers lit up the night sky. One helicopter took hits but continued to fly. The Delta Force commandos descended on ropes, moving with practiced efficiency. Within seconds, they were on the roof. Using explosives, they breached the entrance. The sound must have been deafening. Maduro and his wife woke to chaos. According to U.S. officials who later described the operation, Maduro immediately tried to reach his steel-reinforced safe room. He ran through the hallway. The commandos pursued him. He reached the door of the safe room but could not close it in time. The soldiers caught up to him. Within 5 minutes of entering the building, they had Maduro and Flores in custody. The extraction was equally swift. With Maduro and Flores secured, the Delta Force operators called for the helicopters. Fighter jets and drones provided overhead cover. Venezuelan forces, still reeling from the initial strikes, were unable to mount an effective response. By 3:29 a.m. Eastern Time, the helicopters were back over open water with both captives aboard. The operation had taken less than 90 minutes from the first strike to the successful extraction. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, would later call it a testament to months of planning, intelligence gathering, and rehearsal. No American personnel were killed in the operation, though 7 were wounded. Venezuelan authorities would report that dozens of their personnel lost their lives, including security forces at Fort Tuna, and according to the Cuban government, 32 Cuban military and intelligence personnel who had been providing security services. Maduro and Flores were transferred to the USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship positioned in the Caribbean. On Saturday morning, Trump posted a photograph on Truth Social showing a blindfolded man in a gray sweatsuit aboard the ship, holding a plastic water bottle. The image was stark and deliberate. Here was a sitting president of another country, now a prisoner in American custody. From the Iwo Jima, they were taken to Guantanamo Bay, then flown to Stewart Air National Guard Base in New York. By Saturday evening, Maduro was on American soil. Photos later showed him being led in handcuffs through the Drug Enforcement Administration's New York office. It was a perp walk broadcast to the world. When news broke on Saturday morning, the reaction was immediate and global. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and networks around the world interrupted their programming with breaking news bulletins. Venezuela's longtime president was in American custody. The United States had carried out military strikes on a sovereign nation's capital and physically removed its head of state. The operation, which had taken months to plan and minutes to execute, had succeeded beyond what many military experts thought possible. But even as the tactical success became clear, profound questions emerged. Why had America done this? Was the official justification credible? And what did this mean for international order? Trump's administration offered two primary justifications for the operation. The first was narco-terrorism. The Department of Justice announced that Maduro and Flores faced charges in the Southern District of New York, including narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, and weapons-related offenses. The indictment, parts of which had been prepared years earlier during Trump's first term, alleged that since 1999, Maduro had supported drug trafficking organizations that smuggled cocaine into the United States. Attorney General Pam Bondi stated that Maduro would face the full force of American justice. Secretary of State Rubio emphasized that Maduro had been given multiple opportunities to step down peacefully, but had chosen to refuse. The second justification Trump offered was more direct. He framed the operation as recovering stolen American property. In multiple statements following the capture, Trump claimed that Venezuela had seized billions of dollars worth of oil assets, platforms, and infrastructure that had been built by American companies. He called it one of the largest thefts in American history. The day after the operation, Trump said the goal was to rebuild Venezuela's oil industry and allow American companies to invest billions of dollars. He repeatedly mentioned Venezuela's vast oil reserves and the need for the United States to have access to them. Critics immediately challenged both justifications. While it was true that Maduro faced drug trafficking charges, Venezuela was not a major cocaine producer. According to drug policy experts and intelligence assessments, Venezuela served primarily as a transit country for cocaine produced in Colombia. The vast majority of cocaine passing through Venezuela went to Europe, not the United States. Data from the Drug Enforcement Administration showed that most cocaine entering the United States came through Mexico, Guatemala, and Colombia via Pacific routes. Venezuela, which lacks a Pacific coast, played a relatively minor role in the drug trade affecting America. Moreover, the primary drug killing Americans in record numbers was fentanyl, which came from Mexico and was manufactured from Chinese precursor chemicals. Venezuela had no significant role in the fentanyl trade. If the true motivation was stopping drugs that harm Americans, many questioned why Venezuela was the target rather than Mexico or Guatemala, where cocaine trafficking was far more significant. The question of stolen oil assets required looking deeper into history. Oil was discovered in Venezuela in 1922. By 1929, Venezuela had become the world's second largest oil producer. American companies including Standard Oil, Gulf Oil, and Shell invested heavily in Venezuelan oil development throughout the early and mid-20th century. Venezuela's oil was different from most crude. It was heavy and sour, ideal for producing diesel, asphalt, and industrial fuel oils. American refineries along the Gulf Coast were specifically designed to process this type of crude. By the 1970s, the relationship between American oil companies and Venezuela seemed stable and mutually beneficial. That began to change in 1976 when President Carlos Andrés Pérez nationalized Venezuela's oil industry, creating Petróleos de Venezuela, or PDVSA. The nationalization was not particularly confrontational. American companies received compensation, maintained service contracts, and continued working with PDVSA in technical capacities. The United States government, while not thrilled with the nationalization, accepted it as Venezuela's sovereign right. For the next 2 decades, American companies continued to profit from their relationships with PDVSA. In the 1990s, Venezuela even invited foreign companies back to help develop the massive oil reserves in the Orinoco River Basin. The real break came with Hugo Chávez. Elected president in 1998, Chávez represented a fundamental challenge to Venezuela's traditional political and economic order. He came from poverty, had military training, and harbored deep resentment toward what he saw as Venezuela's corrupt elite and their foreign partners. In 2001, Chávez enacted the Organic Hydrocarbons Law, which asserted complete state ownership over all oil and gas reserves. The law required that PDVSA hold majority stakes in all extraction operations. Foreign companies could participate, but only in subordinate roles. Most significantly, Chávez began using PDVSA not just as a business, but as a funding mechanism for social programs. Oil revenue was redirected from reinvestment and dividends to foreign partners toward healthcare, education, and housing for Venezuela's poor. When PDVSA workers struck in 2002 and 2003, attempting to pressure Chávez to resign, he responded by firing thousands of them, including many with decades of technical expertise. The company never fully recovered. Then in 2007, Chávez dramatically escalated the nationalization campaign. He required all foreign oil companies to accept minority stakes and give operational control to PDVSA. Most companies, including BP, Total, and Chevron, negotiated new agreements and stayed. 2 companies refused. ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips walked away from their operations. The Venezuelan government seized their assets, taking control of facilities, equipment, and projects worth billions of dollars. ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips sued for compensation through international arbitration. Years of legal battles followed. In 2014, an arbitration panel awarded ExxonMobil $1.6 billion, a fraction of what the company claimed it was owed. ConocoPhillips was awarded $8.5 billion in a separate case, a ruling upheld in 2025. Venezuela has not paid either award. The companies have attempted to seize Venezuelan assets worldwide, including tankers and refinery stakes, with limited success. This was the theft Trump referred to, but international law experts pointed out that nationalization of natural resources, while controversial and economically harmful, is not theft in the legal sense. Countries have sovereignty over resources within their borders. Venezuela's actions, while damaging to American corporate interests, were exercises of sovereign authority recognized under international law. The real motivation behind Operation Absolute Resolve appeared to be neither drugs nor recovering stolen assets, but control over oil. Venezuela possesses the world's largest proven crude oil reserves, approximately 303 billion barrels. That is more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than any other nation. Under sanctions and mismanagement, Venezuelan production had collapsed to barely 1 million barrels per day, but the resource remained. American refineries, particularly along the Gulf Coast, were built specifically for Venezuelan heavy crude. Without it, they operate inefficiently. Meanwhile, China had become the primary buyer of Venezuelan oil, purchasing roughly 68% of Venezuela's exports. The geopolitical implications were significant. A country in America's backyard, with vast oil reserves, was economically aligned with Washington's primary rival. Trump made little effort to hide his focus on oil. In his first statement after the operation, he spent considerable time discussing Venezuela's oil wealth. He claimed American companies built Venezuela's oil industry and that it should rightfully benefit America. He announced plans for American firms to invest billions in rebuilding infrastructure. When asked directly about oil, he was blunt. He wanted American companies back in Venezuela. He wanted the oil industry rebuilt and productive. The implications were clear. This was about securing resources and denying them to competitors. On Monday, January 5th, Maduro and Flores appeared in federal court in Manhattan. Maduro, wearing dark clothing, stood before Judge Alvin Hellerstein. When asked to enter a plea, Maduro said he considered himself a prisoner of war and that he was captured at his home in Caracas. Both he and Flores pleaded not guilty to all charges. The judge ordered them held pending a hearing scheduled for March 17th. They were taken to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, a facility known for poor conditions and violence. The irony was not lost on observers. A man who had ruled a country of more than 30 million people was now confined to a cell in one of America's most notorious jails. The international reaction to the operation was swift and divided. Latin American countries including Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Uruguay issued a joint statement expressing profound concern and firm rejection of the military action. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva called it a very serious affront to Venezuelan sovereignty and an extremely dangerous precedent. Colombian President Gustavo Petro condemned it as aggression not just against Venezuela, but against Latin America as a whole. He deployed security forces along the Colombian-Venezuelan border, anticipating potential refugee flows. Mexico called the strikes a clear violation of the United Nations Charter. Even Spain, a NATO ally, urged a escalation and respect for international law. Russia and China, as expected, issued strong condemnations. Russia's foreign ministry called it an act of armed aggression that gave rise to deep concern. China stated it was deeply shocked and condemned the blatant use of force. But beyond adversaries, even some European allies expressed discomfort. French President Emmanuel Macron initially seemed pleased at Maduro's removal, but later clarified that France neither supported nor approved of the method used. He stressed the importance of international law. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas noted that while Maduro lacked legitimacy, the United Nations Charter must be respected. The United Kingdom's Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he wanted to establish the facts and speak with Trump before making firm statements, but emphasized Britain's commitment to international law. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres issued a carefully worded but pointed statement. He said the actions had worrying implications for the region, constituted a dangerous precedent, and raised concerns that rules of international law had not been respected. At an emergency session of the UN Security Council, requested by China, Colombia, and Russia, representatives from dozens of countries condemned the operation. Russia and China called for Maduro's immediate release. The non-aligned movement, representing 125 countries, characterized the operation as a violation of the UN Charter. Venezuela's ambassador described it as an illegitimate armed attack motivated by desire for Venezuela's natural resources. The American response at the Security Council was defensive. The U.S. representative rejected characterizations of military aggression, insisting the operation was a targeted law enforcement measure to arrest an indicted fugitive. But this argument strained credibility. Law enforcement operations do not typically involve more than 150 military aircraft, airstrikes on air defense systems, and the deaths of dozens of military personnel. Article 2.4 of the UN Charter explicitly prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The exceptions are clear: self-defense in response to an armed attack or authorization by the Security Council. Neither applied to Venezuela. The operation was, by any reasonable interpretation, a violation of international law. Domestically in the United States, the reaction split largely along partisan lines. Most Republicans praised the operation. They called Maduro a dictator and drug trafficker, whose removal benefited both Venezuela and American security. House Speaker Mike Johnson described it as a decisive and justified operation, but some Republicans expressed concern. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia questioned whether the action served American interests. Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky argued that the administration had bypassed constitutional requirements for congressional authorization. Democrats were more uniformly critical. Representative Delia Ramirez of Illinois called for Trump's impeachment, saying he had lied to justify an illegal war. Representative Dan Goldman of New York accused Trump of using illegal and unconstitutional tactics. He called the operation a violation of the Constitution and an impeachable offense. Representative Maxine Waters of California stated that Trump had no authority to bypass Congress to launch military strikes against a sovereign nation. Representative April McLean Delaney of Maryland called on the Democratic caucus to immediately consider impeachment proceedings. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia announced that his bipartisan war powers resolution would come up for a vote. The criticism focused on 2 points. First, Trump had not sought congressional authorization as required by the Constitution and the War Powers Resolution of 1973. Second, the drug trafficking justification appeared pretextual given the operation's clear focus on oil. The War Powers Resolution of 1973, passed in the wake of Vietnam, was designed to constrain presidential war-making. It allows the president to introduce armed forces into hostilities only in 3 scenarios: a declaration of war by Congress, specific statutory authorization by Congress, or a national emergency created by an attack on the United States or its forces. None of these applied. Venezuela had not attacked America. Congress had not declared war or authorized force. The resolution also requires the president to consult with Congress before introducing forces into hostilities and to report to Congress within 48 hours. Neither consultation nor timely reporting occurred. Democratic leaders, including Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, demanded briefings for their members. Representative Greg Meeks, ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, said he received absolutely no briefing or advance notice and learned everything from the news media. The administration's response was to reframe the operation as law enforcement rather than war. Secretary of State Rubio told NBC's Meet the Press that it was not an attack on Venezuela, but a law enforcement function to capture an indicted drug trafficker. He argued the Pentagon was involved only because Venezuela had anti-aircraft capabilities that could shoot down helicopters, but this distinction failed to persuade critics. If a foreign government sent special forces, backed by airstrikes, into the United States to capture an indicted American citizen, no one would characterize it as mere law enforcement. The scale of the operation, the use of military force, and the deaths of military personnel made it unmistakably an act of war. Constitutional scholars noted that even if one accepted the law enforcement framing, the president does not have unlimited authority to use military force for law enforcement purposes. The Posse Comitatus Act restricts the use of military forces for domestic law enforcement. While that act doesn't directly apply to operations in foreign countries, the principle behind it reflects a broader constitutional concern about executive power. The framers of the Constitution deliberately gave Congress the power to declare war because they feared executive overreach. They had witnessed the ease with which kings and emperors dragged nations into conflict. They wanted American wars to be deliberate, debated, and approved by the people's representatives. Trump's unilateral action in Venezuela contradicted that fundamental design. Inside Venezuela, the aftermath was chaotic and tense. The Venezuelan Supreme Court, controlled by Maduro loyalists, quickly appointed Vice President Delcy Rodriguez as interim president for a period of 90 days. Rodriguez, 56 years old, was a stalwart of the Chavista movement. She had served as Maduro's oil minister and vice president. Her father had been a Marxist revolutionary who died in police custody in the 1970s. She had spent her entire adult life as part of Venezuela's socialist political movement. Her initial response to the operation was defiant. She called it a savage attack and a barbarity. She stated that Venezuela would never again be a colony of any empire. On state television, she held a meeting of her Council of Ministers. Behind her hung portraits of Hugo Chavez, Nicolás Maduro, and Simón Bolívar, Venezuela's independence hero. But Rodriguez faced an impossible situation. Her country had just been attacked. Its president was in an American prison. American military assets remained in the region, and President Trump had issued a direct threat. On Air Force One, Trump told reporters that if Rodriguez didn't do what was right, she would pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro. Trump said the United States would run Venezuela, at least temporarily. He said American companies would invest billions to rebuild oil infrastructure. He made clear that the U.S. expected total access to Venezuelan oil and other resources. Rodriguez was caught between defending national sovereignty and avoiding further American military action. By Sunday, her tone had shifted. She issued a statement directed at Trump, saying the Venezuelan people deserved peace and dialogue, not war. She offered an agenda of cooperation with the United States aimed at shared development within the framework of international law. She emphasized Venezuela's commitment to peace and its right to sovereignty. The shift was notable. Within 24 hours, Rodriguez had gone from defiance to conciliation. The message was clear. Venezuela, its military depleted and its infrastructure degraded, could not resist American power. Cooperation, however distasteful, seemed the only viable path. Trump's threats extended beyond Venezuela. He warned Colombia that it might face similar action if President Petro did not cooperate. He reiterated his long-standing desire to acquire Greenland, a semi-autonomous Danish territory. He threatened India with tariffs if it continued buying Russian oil. The pattern suggested that Trump viewed American military and economic power as tools to reshape the global order according to his preferences. Critics called it neocolonialism or 21st century imperialism. Supporters argued it represented American strength and willingness to pursue national interests without apology. The historical parallels were unavoidable. In 1989, President George H.W. Bush ordered an invasion of Panama to capture Manuel Noriega, who faced drug trafficking charges in the United States. Operation Just Cause involved thousands of troops, resulted in hundreds of deaths, and led to Noriega's arrest and conviction. The international community condemned it as a violation of Panamanian sovereignty. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights found the invasion violated international law, but Noriega was eventually convicted and served years in prison. The operation's success from a military perspective was undeniable. Its legality and morality remained contested. The Venezuela operation was even more brazen. Panama in 1989 had a population of about 2.5 million. Venezuela has more than 30 million. Noriega was a military dictator with limited popular support. Maduro, whatever his flaws, had been elected, albeit in elections widely criticized as unfair. The scale and audacity of Operation Absolute Resolve exceeded anything attempted since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And unlike Iraq, where Congress had at least voted to authorize force, Venezuela was a purely executive action. What happens next remains uncertain. As of today, January 12, 2026, Maduro remains in custody in New York awaiting trial. Delcy Rodriguez serves as Venezuela's acting president, walking a tightrope between satisfying American demands and maintaining legitimacy with her own people. The Venezuelan military has recognized her authority, but tensions simmer. In Caracas, people remain largely inside their homes. Security forces patrol the streets. Some Venezuelans celebrate Maduro's removal. Others condemn what they see as American imperialism. The country's future is deeply uncertain. Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2025, and whom many international observers believe won Venezuela's disputed 2024 election, remains out of power. She fled Venezuela after Maduro's government threatened to arrest her. In interviews from an undisclosed location, she has called for elections and for a free Venezuela. But Trump has been dismissive of her, suggesting she lacks the support needed to govern. His administration has chosen to work with Rodriguez, a figure they can control, rather than empower genuine democratic opposition. The American companies Trump promised would invest billions have been cautious. Chevron, which maintained operations in Venezuela even during sanctions, says it is focused on employee safety and has not announced expansion plans. Other companies are waiting to see if political stability can be achieved. Rebuilding Venezuela's oil infrastructure could cost between $50 and $100 billion and take a decade or more. Pipelines are corroded, refineries are outdated, technical expertise has fled the country. It is not a quick or easy fix. The broader implications for international order are profound. If the United States can unilaterally attack a country, remove its leader, and face no consequences beyond diplomatic complaints, what prevents other powerful nations from doing the same? China has long claimed Taiwan. Could Beijing argue that if America can capture Maduro, China can reunify Taiwan by force? Russia has invaded Ukraine and absorbed Crimea. Will Trump's action embolden further Russian aggression? Israel's actions in Gaza and its interest in the West Bank raise similar questions. If international law can be set aside when inconvenient, what restrains the powerful? The UN Charter was written in the aftermath of World War II. Its central purpose was to prevent the kind of aggressive war that had consumed the world in conflict. Article 2.4 prohibits the use of force against other states. The exceptions are narrow and deliberate: self-defense and Security Council authorization. These rules exist not because the powerful nations wanted them, but because the world recognized that without rules, strength alone would govern. The operation in Venezuela suggests a return to an older logic. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. This documentary has examined the operation from multiple angles. The military planning and execution were remarkable. The intelligence gathering and rehearsal demonstrated American capabilities at their peak. But the legal justification remains dubious. The official rationale about drug trafficking does not withstand scrutiny when compared to the facts about where drugs enter the United States and which countries play the largest roles. The real motivation appears to be control over Venezuela's oil reserves and denial of those resources to China. Whether one views this as pragmatic pursuit of national interest or as illegal aggression depends largely on perspective. What is certain is that Operation Absolute Resolve has set a precedent. Future historians will examine this moment as a turning point. Either international norms will reassert themselves, and the operation will be remembered as an aberration that was condemned and not repeated, or it will be seen as the beginning of a new era where powerful nations feel free to act unilaterally against weaker neighbors. The Venezuelan people, who have suffered through economic collapse, hyperinflation, and political repression, deserve better than to be pawns in great power competition. They deserve genuine democracy, prosperity, and sovereignty. Whether the current situation leads toward those outcomes or further away from them remains to be seen. The world watches and waits to see what comes next. American forces remain positioned in the Caribbean. Trump continues to threaten other nations. The international community has condemned the action, but taken no concrete steps to reverse it. Congress debates but lacks the will or votes to constrain the president. And in a jail cell in Brooklyn, Nicolas Maduro awaits trial, a living symbol of how dramatically and suddenly power can shift in the modern world. Current developments. As of January 12, 2026, Nicolas Maduro remains in pretrial detention at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, following his arraignment on drug trafficking charges. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez continues to navigate between U.S. demands and Venezuelan sovereignty. The international debate over the operation's legality and precedent-setting implications continues at the United Nations and among legal scholars. This script is based on reporting from major international news organizations including CNN, The New York Times, BBC, Reuters, Time Magazine, The Washington Post, CBS News, Al Jazeera, NPR, Fox News, ABC News, and official statements from the White House, UN, and various governments.